Step into the grandest ballroom of London in the year 1860. The chandeliers are blazing, reflecting off the polished mahogany and the glittering diamonds of the British Empire's elite. The orchestra is playing a frantic waltz. Look at the women spinning across the floor. Look at the colour of their magnificent, sprawling silk gowns. It is a green so vivid, so electric, so incredibly luminous that it seems to generate its own light. It doesn't fade in the gaslight. It doesn't dull. It is the colour of wealth, of high fashion, of an empire at the absolute zenith of its global dominance. But look closer. As the silk rustles, a fine, invisible dust shakes loose into the air. Thanks to advanced AI technology, we can transform old photos and historical paintings into highly realistic footage, allowing us to peer through the glamorous veneer of the Victorian era and witness the terrifying reality lurking beneath. That magnificent colour, that breathtaking emerald hue dominating the ballrooms, the parlours, and the nurseries of the 19th century? It is copper arsenite. Arsenic. Welcome to the Victorian era, an era of unprecedented industrial triumph and an era of unfathomable systemic murder by commerce. To understand how an entire society poisoned itself willingly, we have to look back to 1775. A brilliant Swedish chemist named Carl Wilhelm Scheele is experimenting in his laboratory. He mixes copper with arsenic trioxide. The result? A green pigment unlike anything the world has ever seen. Until this moment, green dyes were a muddy, unstable disappointment. Artisans had to layer yellow and blue, which quickly faded to a sickly brownish yellow in sunlight. But Scheele's green? It was a revelation. It was brilliant. It was permanent. It was cheap to produce. A few decades later, an even more vibrant, toxic variant called Paris green is developed, and suddenly, the Victorian world goes mad for it. They don't just want it, they demand it. The colour cascades through every level of society. Emerald green ball gowns, emerald green floral headpieces, emerald green wallpapers, carpets, curtains and upholstery, emerald green book covers, postage stamps and children's toys. It is painted onto the wooden blocks of toddlers. It is dyed into the leather of gloves that gentlemen wear to hold their lovers' hands. Insanely, it is even used to dye food. The icing on decorative cakes? Green arsenic. The wrapping on chocolate candies? Green arsenic. How much poison are we talking about? A single ball gown from the 1860s could contain up to 900 grains of arsenic. For context, a mere 4 or 5 grains is enough to kill a healthy adult. A woman wearing one of these dresses into a ballroom was effectively wearing a chemical weapon. As she danced, the fabric chafed and the toxic dust sheared off, floating into the lungs of her partners, her admirers, and herself. But did the elite care? Did the manufacturers stop? No. The factories churned, the cash flowed, the empire expanded. To truly understand this poison, you must understand the world that produced it. We must cut away from the sparkling champagne and the waltzing aristocrats of Mayfair. We must travel east. Fast forward the carriage down the cobblestones, leave behind the sprawling townhouses of Belgravia. Welcome to the East End of London. Welcome to the abyss. Breathe in. What do you smell? It isn't lavender or imported French perfume. It is the stench of the apocalypse. It is a putrid, suffocating wall of raw sewage, human excrement, rotting animal carcasses from the unregulated slaughterhouses, and the sharp, metallic tang of industrial soot. The River Thames isn't a river. It is a slow-moving, black-brown sludge of human waste and industrial runoff. In the summer of 1858, the stench becomes so biblically horrific, an event known as the Great Stink. Members of Parliament have to soak their curtains in chloride of lime just to stop themselves from vomiting while passing laws. Here, in the claustrophobic, lightless slums of Spitalfields and Bethnal Green, people are stacked on top of each other, 10, 12, sometimes 15 people living, sleeping and dying in a single damp, windowless room. The air is thick with yellow-black smog, a choking mixture of fog and coal smoke that settles in the lungs and rots them from the inside out. Cholera is a constant, terrifying spectre. It sweeps through these slums like a scythe, turning its victims blue as they violently purge all the fluids from their bodies, dying in agonizing, dehydrated spasms. Typhus, tuberculosis, dysentery. This is the engine room of the British Empire. This is where the magnificent emerald green is made. Who is making it? Not machines. People. Desperate, starving, expendable people. Women, children, orphans. Step into a Victorian artificial flower workshop. There is no ventilation. There are no safety masks. There are no labour laws. Dozens of teenage girls sit at long wooden tables for up to 16 hours a day. Their job is to take delicate silk leaves, coat them in warm glue, and then plunge them into vats of pure, finely milled Sheila's green powder. They dust the powder on with their bare hands. They flick it with brushes. The air in the workshop is a permanent, glittering green fog. It settles in their hair. It cakes under their fingernails. It coats their sweat. They breathe it in, hour after hour, day after day. They are being paid pennies to slowly, painfully execute themselves so that a duchess can have a pretty hat. History is full of statistics. Statistics are cold. Let us look at a name. Let us look at a body. Her name is Matilda Scheurer. The year is 1861. She is 19 years old. Matilda works in one of these artificial flower sweatshops. For months, she has been dusting leaves with copper arsenite. What does chronic arsenic poisoning look like? It is not a sudden, peaceful sleep. It is a brutal, agonizing dismantling of the human body. First comes the fatigue, then the headaches, then the arsenic dust, settling on the sweaty skin of the workers, reacts to create deep, weeping, chemical burns. They call them arsenic pox. These ulcerating sores erupt on their hands, their faces, and in their groins. Their fingernails turn a sickly, vibrant yellow-green. The whites of their eyes turn yellow. By late November, Matilda's body simply collapses. She is carried home to a miserable, freezing room, and then the true horror begins. Arsenic destroys the body's ability to process cellular energy. You suffocate on a microscopic level. Matilda begins to vomit. She does not vomit food. She vomits a thick, glowing green liquid. The whites of her eyes, according to the physician who attends her, have turned a vivid, terrifying green. She suffers from violent, bone-breaking convulsions. Her throat is so inflamed, it feels as though she has swallowed hot coals. She gasps for air, frothing at the mouth, her vision failing, her nervous system completely short-circuiting. She dies in a state of absolute screaming agony. When the autopsy is performed, the coroner finds arsenic everywhere. It is in her stomach. It is in her liver. It is in her lungs. Her very blood has been saturated with the toxic pigment. The press gets hold of the story. The Times publishes horrific accounts of the Green Death. There is public outcry. Philanthropists write angry letters. But what changes? Does the government ban the pigment? Do the lords and ladies burn their green dresses? No. The wealthy women of London read about the gruesome death of Matilda Scheurer while sitting in their arsenic green parlours wearing their arsenic green day dresses. They sigh at the tragedy of the lower classes. They whisper that perhaps the poor girls simply don't wash their hands enough. And then they go out and buy more green flowers. The profits are simply too high to let a few dead teenagers get in the way of fashion. If you think the carnage of Victorian arsenic was limited to the slow poisoning of sweatshop workers, you grossly underestimate the chaotic, unregulated nightmare of 19th century commerce. Let us move away from London. Let us travel north to the industrial powerhouse of Bradford, The year is 1858. In this era, sugar is heavily taxed. It is expensive. To keep profits high and prices low, confectioners and food manufacturers constantly adulterate their products. They mix flour with chalk, they mix tea with iron filings, and they mix candy with a cheap, heavy powder known as daff, usually plaster of Paris or powdered limestone. It's fraudulent, it's illegal, but everyone does it. A local sweetmaker named Joseph Neal wants to make a batch of peppermint lozenges. He needs daff to bulk out the sugar. He sends a young assistant to the local pharmacy, owned by a man named Charles Goddard, to buy 12 pounds of the cheap white powder. Goddard is sick that day. The shop is manned by his young, inexperienced assistant. The assistant goes to the back room. He looks for the cask of daff. He finds a wooden cask in the corner, opens it, and scoops out 12 pounds of fine white powder. But he doesn't grab the plaster of Paris. He grabs the cask next to it. He scoops out 12 pounds of pure, highly concentrated arsenic trioxide. 12 pounds. A fraction of an ounce is lethal. 12 pounds is enough to exterminate a small army. The assistant sells the powder. The sweetmaker receives it. He hands it over to his manufacturer, who mixes this massive mountain of poison into the sugar and peppermint oil. The manufacturer even notices that the mixture looks strange. It doesn't bind correctly. It looks a bit dull. Does he stop? Does he throw it out? Of course not. He finishes the batch, cuts the sweets into shapes, and sells them at a heavy discount to a market stall holder named William Hardacre, known locally as Humbug Billy. On Saturday night, the market in Bradford is teeming with life. Mill workers, exhausted from their 70-hour weeks, are spending their meagre wages. Children are running between the stalls. Humbug Billy has a special offer. Delicious peppermint lozenges, cheaper than ever before. They buy them by the handful. They eat them on the spot. They take them home to their families. What happens next is a scene straight out of a horror film. Within hours, the streets of Bradford run with vomit and screams. Children collapse in the gutters, clutching their stomachs, screaming that their insides are on fire. Men and women fall to the cobblestones, violently purging blood and bile. At first, the local doctors panic, believing a catastrophic new strain of cholera has hit the city. The symptoms are nearly identical: violent diarrhea, extreme dehydration, muscle cramping, and the bluish pallor of approaching death. But the sheer speed of the collapse is unnatural. By Sunday morning, the truth begins to surface. Every single victim had eaten Humbug Billy's peppermint sweets. By the time the police seize the remaining candies, the damage is done. 21 people are dead. Most of them are children, their tiny bodies entirely destroyed by the corrosive poison. Over 200 more are left permanently crippled, their livers and kidneys irreparably damaged, doomed to lives of chronic pain and early death. Humbug Billy himself ate one of the sweets and spent days hovering near death, barely surviving. 21 bodies, a whole town poisoned. The trial is a sensation. The public demands hangings. But what happens? The pharmacist is charged with manslaughter. But the charges are ultimately dropped due to legal technicalities. No one hangs. No one is severely punished. The absolute, breathtaking negligence of placing a cask of cheap chalk right next to a cask of weapons-grade poison in an unregulated pharmacy is brushed off as a tragic mistake. The Bradford sweet poisoning forces the government to pass the Pharmacy Act of 1868 and the Arsenic Act, requiring poisons to be clearly labelled and coloured so they can't be mistaken for food. But here is the magnificent hypocrisy of the Victorian era. They heavily regulated the eating of arsenic, but they absolutely refused to ban its use in manufacturing. You couldn't buy it to kill rats without a signature, but you could still buy 100 yards of arsenic-laced wallpaper and cover your child's nursery in it. And that brings us to the most insidious killer of all, the walls. The Victorians were obsessed with interior design, and the king of interior design was William Morris. His beautiful, intricate floral wallpapers are still legendary today. And in the 1870s, many of those beautiful green patterns were absolutely loaded with arsenic. People began to notice a terrifying trend. Families would move into a newly decorated, expensive home. Within weeks, they would fall ill. Headaches, nausea, a strange metallic taste in the mouth, wasting sickness. Children would simply fade away and die in their beautiful bright green bedrooms. When the families went away to the seaside or the country to recover, their health miraculously returned. The moment they stepped back into their grand London homes, the sickness returned. Doctors were baffled. If the wallpaper was toxic, it shouldn't poison you unless you licked it, right? Wrong. The damp, cold, fog-bound climate of London was the final, fatal ingredient. Moisture would seep into the walls of these houses. A microscopic fungus would begin to grow on the wallpaper paste. To survive the toxic arsenic in the pigment, this fungus metabolized the arsenic and excreted it into the air as a gas, trimethylarsine. The walls were literally breathing poison gas into the rooms. If you slept in a room with green wallpaper, with the windows tightly shut against the London smog, you were slowly gassing yourself to death in your sleep. Chemists began to warn the public. Doctors published terrifying papers, but the manufacturers fought back. William Morris, sitting on a fortune made partly from these pigments, furiously denied that his wallpapers were dangerous. He wrote that doctors who claimed arsenic wallpaper was deadly were bitten by witch fever. He blamed the victims, suggesting they were just sickly people looking for excuses. The denial of the wealthy, when their profits are threatened, is a tale as old as time. So what finally tipped the scales? What finally stopped the madness? It wasn't the deaths of the flower girls. It wasn't the agonizing deaths of children in the slums. It was the Queen. In the late 1870s, a foreign dignitary was visiting London. He was hosted at Buckingham Palace. He was placed in a lavish, newly decorated guest suite. By the morning, he was violently ill, vomiting and suffering from agonizing cramps. His physician investigated the room. He looked at the bright, beautiful green wallpaper. He scraped off a sample, tested it, and found massive quantities of arsenic. He informed Queen Victoria that her palace was a death trap. The Queen, horrified and furious, immediately ordered every single scrap of green wallpaper to be torn down from Buckingham Palace. When Queen Victoria turned her back on Sheila's Green, the game was finally over. The aristocracy panicked. If the Queen's walls were poisoned, what about theirs? Suddenly, the green that had represented the height of fashion became a symbol of paranoia and death. The public demand plummeted. Manufacturers quietly, hastily transitioned to new, synthetic aniline dyes. No grand law was passed to ban arsenic in textiles or wallpapers. The free market, driven by royal panic, simply phased it out. The Victorian era is often romanticised. We watch the period dramas. We admire the top hats, the corsets, the grand architecture, the unstoppable march of steam and steel. We view it as a time of elegance, refinement, and polite society. But look beneath the floorboards. Scrape beneath the paint. The elegance was a facade. The refinement was purchased with the blood and lungs of the invisible underclass. The Victorians built the modern world, but they built it with an absolute, chilling disregard for human life. They were a society that prioritised the aesthetics of wealth over the basic survival of its people. They knowingly dressed their wives in poison, painted their children's toys with toxins, and breathed in toxic gas just because the colour was fashionable. Today we look back in horror. We judge them for their ignorance and their greed. But as we sit surrounded by microplastics, forever chemicals, and toxic industrial runoff in our own modern world, we have to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Have we actually changed? Or have we simply changed the colour of our poison? Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.